Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear evidence from more of those who were concerned in looking after people in the aftermath of the fire. Yes, Mr. Keating.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the panel. Could I call Rupinder Hardy, please?
Good morning, Ms. Hardy.
Good morning. Good morning, panel.
I understand you're going to take the oath. The book is there. Would you take it in your right hand, please, and read the words on the screen?
I swear, according to the Sunda Gudka, that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much. Now, please sit down and make yourself comfortable there. All right?
Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Ms. Hardy. Thank you so much for joining us today and assisting the inquiry with its investigations. Just a few preliminary matters, as we say to all witnesses. Firstly, if you've difficulty understanding any of my questions, please just ask me and I can rephrase those accordingly. Also, if I can invite you to keep your voice up as best you can so that the transcriber sits to your right can capture what you say. Also, it's sometimes natural to nod or shake your head. Again, could I invite you to say yes or no, again, just so it can be captured by the transcriber. Lastly, at any time, if you feel you need a break, just let us know and I'm sure we can accommodate that.
Of course, thank you.
Just a few things by way of formalities. In relation to your statement, you provided one witness statement to the inquiry, and that's dated the 11th of November 2020. Perhaps we could bring that up. That's LBE. We just have it there, thank you. For the record, that's 6/0/25. And we can see that's your statement there. If we could turn to page 31, please. When it turns at 31, we should see your signature. And whilst we're waiting, can you confirm that you've had the opportunity to read your statement?
I have,
recently?
thank you.
Thank you. There we go. So we see at page 31, it's your name in print, the date 11 November 2020. Can you confirm that's your signature?
It is.
And we see above that the statement of truth. Can you confirm that the facts stated in that witness statement are true to the best of your knowledge?
They are indeed.
Excellent. Just by way of overview, Mrs. Hardy, it's right that you became involved in a response to Grenfell Fire Tower on Saturday, the 17th of June 2017, and you attended the Westway Sports Centre as a local authority liaison officer, LALO, on behalf of the London Borough of Ealing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what we'll do with your assistance, we'll examine how you took, in your words, control of the Westway that day on the 17th of June, and examine the days you worked there, which were the 17th of June, the 18th of June, so that weekend,
That's right.
and then on to the 20th of June, which was the Tuesday of the following week.
That's right.
And in terms of background, in June 2017, you were the manager for the business support service at the London Borough of Ealing. Is that correct?
That's right.
And prior to the Grenfell Tower incident, had you any involvement in any emergency incident?
No, I didn't.
And looking briefly at the circumstances in which you became involved, is it right that you responded to an email on the evening of the 15th of June from Ealing's Head of Emergency Management, Donna Wooten, asking for staff to volunteer support?
That's correct, yes. I had been asked to join the emergency management team prior to Grenfell, and I was on track to do that with my training due on the 19th of June. But obviously with the tower fire, I was on the email list of responders, and therefore I responded immediately.
So you'd already expressed an interest in that area.
Yes.
You were due to have your training. And probably because of that lack of training, is it right that you replied to that email and suggest that Philip Lee Morris, who also was a former member of the Ealing emergency team, work with you?
That's right.
In other words, you two attend together.
Absolutely.
And because of your lack of experience, as you described, in that area, it's right that you were provided with some training, short training, as it occurred on the 16th of June. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Short, not a chrism, but it was 1 hour. Is that right?
It was, yes.
And in terms of your position, you had expressed interest on the 15th of June. You had the training provided by the London Borough of Ealing on the 16th of June as a LALO,
That's
Local
right.
Authority Liaison Officer. And prior to your deployment the following day on the Saturday, the 17th of June, had you been provided with any briefing documents, situation reports, or any information in relation to the response and what you were about to
None at
enter?
all. Nothing.
And in relation to the absence of information, let's have a look at an email, please, which is LBE 6029, please. And this is an email which we can see that it's Donna Wooten, who's the lady we mentioned already, who is the head of emergency management at London Borough of Ealing, to you, 16th of June, 12:30. Providing you some documents, we can see which are attachments, but it refers to this. Just so you're aware, I've now escalated to our regional team for briefings or VPs, that's the rendezvous point, to be provided to anyone responding. There is a serious lack of info. I know you'll be fine, thrown in at the deep end, but I hope to get more information before close of play. So that was a position. There was an absence of information, a serious lack of information, notwithstanding the requests. And you attended, is it right, on the morning, the 17th of June, with no information in advance?
Absolutely correct.
So let's turn to your attendance. And I'm going to deal with it in sections, because you provided a very helpful and comprehensive statement with lots of supporting documents and emails. And to help you and to help those who are watching on the panel, I'm going to give you subheadings as we go through it. And the first area is first impressions of the Westway on the 17th of June. So that's the area we're going to explore.
Yeah.
So you arrived, as you say in your statement, at the Westway at about 7 o'clock in the morning
Yes.
with Philip Lee Morris.
Yes.
And both of you were wearing, is it right, high-vis tabards,
That's right.
so that you're identifiable. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you had your IDs, your London Borough of Ealing IDs,
Absolutely.
on display.
Yes.
I just want to ask you what your initial impression was of the appearance of the Westway, the rest centre, that morning on the 17th of June.
It was really quite shocking, to be honest. I remember arriving, first of all, at Westfield to park my car at 6:28 of the morning of the 17th, and then travelling into the outer cordon, towards the outer cordon, to access the inner cordon with Philip. So I have my precise timings because I'm a meticulous record keeper. When we walked towards the Westway, so where the basketball courts are, we took that route in. And there were so many people so early in the morning. It was astounding. It was quite shocking. And I did turn to Philip, because I think it's fair to say that anybody that attended that weekend or in the days prior, and especially up to that weekend, the mass of people, the number of people was truly astounding. It was truly shocking. And I did turn to Philip, and at one point, you have a minute of doubt, and I wondered, and I turned to him and said, I don't know if I could do this, because it felt big. It was overwhelming for a moment, and I have to stress that, for a moment. It's human nature to feel overwhelmed by the enormity of what we saw at the Westway as we approached, and then as we approached the leisure centre itself. So there was a lot of people. We saw the Red Cross desks outside, obviously taking names and handing out wristbands. There was a police cordon up, there were police vans, and obviously later on, I hope I get to tell you, there were a lot of media as well, which we then found in all parts around Westway itself. So it's fair to say it was shocking to see. My first impression was, what is this? What's going on?
Let's try and assist you a little bit more to build on that picture of, as you described, it was quite shocking and overwhelming, I think, were the phrases you used a moment ago. We could turn to paragraph 34 of your statement, please. And it's the top line is this: looking at the rest centre, my first impression was that it looked a mess. It did not appear to be safe, welcoming, or an inviting place, and it failed to encourage residents to come in. There was no sign telling residents what the rest centre offered, services, and who to speak, and so on. And if we look at 35, move down to 35, you describe it, it was a chaotic situation. Confusion and lack of any joined-up working to meet the urgent and pressing needs of those who were present at the rest centre was rife. I felt overwhelmed by what I first saw. This included but not limited to the rest centre surrounded by police tape, the Red Cross desks and some residents still sleeping inside the rest centre. So in relation to the police cordon, you described that something as stood out. Just to visualise that, to assist the panel in visualising. What do we mean by the police cordon?
There was police tape up at the entrance of the Westway to the point where it limited the entrance and the exit, and obviously with police officers on duty as well. And just to the right of that, as you're facing Westway, there was a police van there as well. So it looked, and I remember saying to Philip and I talking about it, saying it felt more like a crime scene than somewhere where you would actually actively want bereaved survivors and residents to come in to seek help. It didn't invite people in because of that appearance. That general first impression was not, I can go here and seek refuge or support. This is a police crime scene. That was the first impression I had.
And in relation to the numbers of police officers, which you mentioned there was a van and there was a cordon, can you form any recollection as to the number of police who were around that morning and during the day?
I didn't actually count the police officers. It's fair to say I think there were a couple on the door, but I to be honest, I dismissed seeing any police officers because that was not my primary concern. My primary concern were the residents, the bereaved and the survivors.
And in relation to the cordon, did you receive any feedback from those who attended the Westway on the impact of the cordon?
It wasn't inviting. They didn't feel like they could go in. They didn't see the representative they would expect to see. I mean, obviously, I went there in a high vis and my ID on, so I was clearly visible to all that needed to see me, even from a distance, that I was in official capacity. So obviously, the officers on scene had their uniforms on, but anybody else, whether it's an official within an official capacity, were not readily identifiable as officers or within the council or other councils indeed. The impression that I got from the residents was that they didn't want to be there, but they were there because that's where the support services were being offered and that's where they were being directed. But they didn't want to be there.
So in relation to the cordon and its negative impact, summarising what you said, what steps were done, if any, to address that issue?
Well, we took down the police cordon. We asked the police vans to be moved, so obviously as far out of sight as possible. And we tried to clear up the outdoor area to make it less, it was just a jumble, to make it more accessible, open the doors. So it's the little things to encourage people to come in, because you don't want people, especially individuals that are so adversely affected. This is such a shocking, devastating incident that you don't want to put people off from seeking the support they will need and the support that was on offer.
Yes. Let's go to paragraph 96 of your statement, which just flows from what you were saying about the impression and presentation. And this is what you say: the rest centre was busy and open to receive everyone. There was issues with bins overflowing, the removal of clinical waste, the heat and impact on food items, and the surrounding area reported street bins overflowing. So this was reported via BEC to action.
Yeah.
Did the situation improve following the report to the Borough Emergency Control Centre, the BEC?
It wasn't immediate. It's when we reported it to the BEC, it's not as if it happened within the next few hours. It did happen, but it shouldn't have been in that state from the get-go. There should have been more rigour. And if you recall, that weekend, it was in the 30s. It was very hot, very sunny. Even with bins overflowing, you'd have the smell, you'd have vermin, you'd have flies. Within the rest centre, obviously Westway Sports Centre, it was still hot as well. With a lot of people, it increases the heat. You want it to be cooler and more comfortable and more inviting. The changing rooms and the toilets, we asked for them to be cleaned as well. And just to have a system in place so they were managed on a regular basis without, either one of us, Philip or I, going around just picking up, bits of rubbish and putting them in the bin.
Yes. I'm going to move on, please, to the next stage. You had this initial impression, and it's the topic of handover. So you arrived that morning, and you, on your account and your statement, said you reported to the reception desk. Who did you understand to be responsible for managing the rest centre that morning on 17th of June?
Really, when we got there, because there was such a lack of information provided, we had no situation reports, we had no details on who was there on an official capacity to support the bereaved and the survivors and the residents. I didn't really know who to expect and who would actually say, oh, okay, you're taking over from me, here's a report of what's going on, someone to pass the baton from. So there really wasn't anybody. It was just bizarre, if I'm honest,
yes.
In terms of going into a situation where you know that you're there to help the bereaved and the survivors, because that is your primary focus, is to see what it is that's needed and what you can do, but not having that information passed on to you to say, right, okay, Rupinder, here's a list of actions, these are the things that we've done, these are the things that need doing. Nothing.
Were you, it probably flows from your last answer, but were you aware that whether there was a rest centre manager in place on the 17th?
I believe there was, and that's just going on recollection from my statement in terms of the individual that I took over from. But that was just a brief, and I make mention of it, here's an envelope with lots of money in it.
Yes, we'll touch upon that a little bit later.
Yeah,
yes.
But that was it, really. I don't recall having had any meaningful conversations with anybody within the rest centre when Philip and I went in as LALOs.
Yes. So the position is, which you set out in your statement at paragraph 36, is that you took over from a colleague from Lewisham Borough Council, and on your account there wasn't a useful handover, no documentation provided to you. Were you concerned by that you were there in person and this lack of information still continued to be a feature?
Yes, and the reason why I was concerned, and obviously following on from the emails that you showed me earlier, the lack of information on the ground. I mean, to say it was sketchy would be generous. There was nothing. When you go into a site, or when I expected to go into a site such as this, after such the fire, I expected to be met with somebody that gave me much more information than I received, and I also expected to have some sort of order, some sort of recognition of process and delivery, because we were there day 3. It was 3 days, and it felt like it was the first night. It felt like the first day, because I could not see, and I didn't expect everything to be flowing, like clockwork. But I did expect to see some rigour, something that I would recognise as, right, okay, so this is the process, this is what you're doing, this is what you've done. Didn't feel that at all. Didn't experience it. Didn't see it.
Well, we'll examine that in more detail in a moment. In fact, it was day 4.
Day 4, yeah.
Yes, and day 4, you, as you expressed, there was that lack of features, as you mentioned a moment ago. In terms of information as to the number and details of the residents who were using the rest centre, was that provided to you or available to you on the morning of the 17th of June?
No.
And did you request that material? Did you request a list of those who had been impacted and affected?
Yes.
Who did you request that from?
I know Philip and I discussed it, and I made mention of it in, I think it's one of the situation reports.
Yes.
So it is within my statement.
Yes.
As to whom I spoke, there were so many people involved in the response in the back. I can't give you a name.
No. But it's something which you requested from a
Yeah.
number of sources, but still there was an absence
Yeah.
of that information.
Yeah, because we're blind as to who everybody is. It is not our borough, even within our own borough, we're not expected to know every single resident. But what I did expect was to have some sort of list or some document to say, these are the people that were housed in the tower. And then when people presented themselves, I could actually it's your approach, isn't it? It's all about how you approach people and your humanitarian response. So we made the decision on site, Philip and I, that we would treat everybody presenting at Westway as they were, because they clearly are, affected by the fire. So we put that out, that everybody that presented, because we did not know survivor, bereaved or resident or volunteer, we would treat them with the same dignity and respect.
If we could turn to page 37 of your statement, please, just to follow this theme in relation to details as to those who were affected. You said that you asked for a list of those within the rest centre, 3 lines down, and was told the Red Cross were collecting this information and that anyone coming inside had to be given a paper wristband. As far as you were aware, what was being done with the information which was obtained by the British Red Cross?
To be honest, without knowing, I would have expected that to go to either the BEC or to RBKC. I didn't ask where that information was going because, again, rightly or wrongly, I expected there to be a process for that information to be retained and passed on.
Was that a feature in relation to registration? Perhaps people were assuming that somebody else was taking care of it?
I think so. I mean, I wish I knew then what I know now, because then I would have taken control of this aspect as well.
And you talk about taking control, registration being one of the features of a rest centre. Was there clarity in your mind then as to who was responsible for registration?
No, there wasn't, because when Philip and I attended Westway, obviously we saw the Red Cross there, but we still at that point weren't aware of what their overarching responsibilities were in terms of the response. That information on partner organisations was missing as well. So it would have been useful to understand what it was they were doing rather than making an assumption. And I think making assumptions in these kind of situations is wrong. The clear direction, the clear information on what the Red Cross were doing would have benefited us in our response to the tower fire on the 4th day.
And did you yourself set up any process in relation to collecting and collating information of those who attended the Westway?
I didn't take anything from the Red Cross in terms of registration of individuals. I did myself start in my contemporaneous notes and in some of the other documents I have. I did start writing down names of individuals, and that was a mix of individual staff, volunteers, so I would know who was present, and it also gave me an indication of the numbers of individuals from all walks of life, from all aspects within Kensington and outside as to who was present. But that wasn't a formal process. That was something that I did to inform myself.
Let me show you a document which hopefully might assist your recollection. Mm-hmm. It's LBE 6039. This is one of the emergency situation reports, SITREPs,
yes,
you've been mentioning to, and this is one which is created by Ealing.
Yes.
And we see the dates is 17th of June, the day you attended, and the number 1. And that's something that you and your colleague, Philip Lee Morris, set up, isn't that correct?
That's right.
And we don't need to look at it now, but this document was completed by Philip Lee Morris, and we can see at page 7.
Yes.
But let's turn to page 3, please. And 6 lines down, we'll see in a moment, on page 3. from the second paragraph, and it says resident register. So it says this,
Yeah.
resident register and staff register created to account for those in Westway. Does that assist whether there was some process set up by Ealing and you and your colleague on the 17th of June?
I think it's fair to say that whilst there was a register overseen by the Red Cross, there was also a register inside. But it was a manual record on pieces of paper. There wasn't anything official. There wasn't anything that was in one place, which would have been ideal. So yes, I do agree that there was a register, there was a staff list. I think it was more of a staff list inside the Westway, so we would know who was present. It wasn't a meaningful register. Who was responsible for it? You know, who was updating it? Where was it held? You know, was it the first thing that you did when you walked into Westway? Is it the first thing that you want to do when you walk into Westway, when you're trying to support the bereaved and the residents
Yes.
and the survivors? So it was, if I'm going to be honest, it was really wishy-washy, the whole process of registration.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to another document, just following through this issue regarding registration. It's LBE 6 zeros again, please, 37. And this is a tactical meeting you attended at Ealing Council, maybe by the phone. It appears to be a London Borough of Ealing internal meeting, and we know from other documentation it's dated Monday the 19th of June. So it says tactical meeting, Ealing control room. First question is this an internal London Borough of Ealing meeting, or is this a wider tactical coordination group meeting involving other responders?
It's an internal meeting.
Yes. And we mentioned the date we can confirm is the 19th of June, if you're happy to hear that from me.
Yes.
Let's look at page 2, please, and the 4th paragraph. We see RH, that's you, also asked questions about the availability of a list of residents. JC confirmed that this has been sent and was accessible by centre managers and social care on site. So this is the 20th of June, as we mentioned a couple of times. Can you help as to whether, by that stage, being a Tuesday of the following week, whether a list of residents was available to centre managers and you, as indicated in this note?
I didn't see it.
You didn't see it?
I didn't see it.
If we could have a look at LBE 6 zeros again, please. 19, thank you. And this is another SITREP dated the 20th of June. We see at page 1 under the entry at 12:40, please, which is the second time there. Mm-hmm. And it says just at the bottom of that entry at 12:40 and above 12:50, there is no definitive list of V/S. Was that a reference to victim and survivors?
That's right.
So that's the entry there on the 20th of June, that there still remains to be no definitive list.
That's right.
And that accords with what your evidence was to us a few moments ago.
That's right.
So is it the position from your evidence that issues regarding obtaining a definitive list still existed a week after the fire, this being the 20th of June?
Yes.
If we continue and look at 13:15, we see, and I think my pronunciation probably is right for this one, Roisin.
Yes.
Request by Roisin for another admin laptop to enter Red Cross names. Was that anything in relation to any process which has been set up in relation to Red Cross names and registration?
I think what was happening is that we weren't getting access to that information. We didn't have a list of names. It was being kept elsewhere. So the request, because this is my situation report, the request for another laptop was to assist that process, for us to take some sort of ownership of that.
I'm going to move on, please, now to your initial impression you've touched upon already of the management of the rest centre, leadership and coordination. Mm-hmm. So quite a few things there. And perhaps we could look at paragraph 30 of your statement again, please. And you state there, it was clear there was a lack of grip at the rest centre It seemed disorganised and chaotic, with lots of people in it, but I could not tell who the staff were from residents. There did not appear to be a clear command structure that I could identify, or anyone with overall decision-making responsibility. Keeping that in mind, if we could move on to paragraph 57, please. And 4 lines down. The difficulty in taking up our posts at the rest centre was compounded by the fact that there was no official handover, which you've mentioned to us, no walkthrough of the site, no introduction to any local authority officers or those from other boroughs, Organisationally, it was a shambles, and not what I was expecting. Certainly not what I am used to seeing from a local authority. Is that a fair description of your assessment of the management and coordination of the rest centre on the 17th of June?
Absolutely.
If we could go back to paragraph 31, please. And you say this: as we were both fresh to the rest centre, it became apparent that visible leadership, a point of contact, and a point of escalation were needed, with a structure that was robust, supportive, emphatic, needs-focused and collaborative, to work with the volunteers and partners already at the scene. And given that you and Philip Lee Morris, to use your phrase, were fresh to the rest centre, what assessment had you undertaken in order to reach these conclusions which we've read out in the last couple of moments?
I don't think it really took us much of an assessment because there was no process in place. There was no control, there was no authority, there were no people that we could identify. I didn't know who was making decisions, who was running the centre. So when I say the time taken, it was almost immediate, because you know from the type of work that you do and the role that I did at Ealing, that it wasn't going to work unless somebody stepped up and said, right, this is what we need to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is how it's going to play out. Because the whole point of us being there was to support the bereaved and the survivors. That was our primary concern. And as local authority officers from another council, as public servants, it was our duty to make sure that the centre operated to the best of its ability, regardless of who was in command, to deliver to the immediate needs of the bereaved and the survivors. So the first impression was, it's not doing that. What can we do to make that happen?
If we could turn, please, to LBE 704, please. And this is an email which you've provided in your material. And if we could look at the third email, please, which is at 9:36. I'll scroll down. Thank you so much. So it's you're the sender.
Yes.
You can see it to Donna Wootton again.
Yes.
And it says this in pretty short form: I've assumed control of the West Wing.
Yes.
And what did you mean by this, that you've assumed control? You went down there as a lay-low rather than a rest centre manager.
Yes.
And within a couple of hours, you've emailed your superiors at Ealing to this effect.
Yes.
And why did you make that decision?
Because there was no leadership on the ground. There was no, and I'm going to bang on about this during my evidence, is that without clear systems, it's a free-for-all. We needed to build a structure pretty rapidly within the centre, so we could focus on the bereaved and the survivors. You know, we couldn't run around asking staff, well, what are you doing? Who are you? What's your job? It didn't make sense. You wouldn't run a business like this, and you certainly wouldn't run an emergency situation like that either. So when I say I've assumed control of Westway, I meant that. I've taken charge. This is my site. We make the decisions now.
Once we've got that email in front of us, so we can scroll up to the next email in the thread, your colleague Philip Lee Morris sending at 09:56. And he says, seems I've taken over the inner cordon, got various actions, and there's been no sit rep, a feature that you've mentioned already.
Yeah.
Asks for a sit rep template, so everything could be properly documented. By the way, Beck is quite chaotic, but we're all from all over London.
Yeah.
Firstly, can you assist with what Philip Lee Morris meant by "I've taken over the inner cordon"?
That was the, obviously that is the inner cordon surrounding the tower. So it's making himself visible, available, and saying that he's a lay low in charge.
So around the tower rather than around the westway?
Yeah, so it was a 30-metre cordon, as I recall. Yes. Yeah.
And in terms of the information which has been fed back, Donna Wooten at the top of this thread says, the third sentence, yes, Sophie, one of your colleagues, one assumes, ended up doing a 15-hour shift yesterday and said much the same.
Mm.
In relation to the Beck, there was reference to the Beck being quite chaotic. At that time, we understand the Beck was located at Westminster City Council.
That's right.
And what was your experience of the Beck on the 17th of June and going forward on those days you worked at the Westway?
Okay, so working with the Beck, taking calls and making calls, I think I had about 3 different numbers for the Beck, which didn't make it easy. When I received calls from the Beck, it was from multiple individuals, sometimes asking for the same thing. I recall being asked for numbers of those still sleeping in the Westway. I think it was about 4 times. I've got all of my phone records as well, so I can quite easily identify that. The Beck didn't seem organised in terms of there's that command structure or that chain, that golden thread that follows up and down, whether it's a business or an incident. It didn't feel that there was anything resembling order within the Beck. And I did go off the book and went to our Beck multiple times because it was far easier dealing with Ealing, Borough Emergency Control Centre, than it was with Westminster.
And you mentioned one of the features was multiple requests for the same thing from different people.
Yeah. And may I add that when you're delivering a function as a lay-low, the last thing you want to do is to be constantly on the phone, being asked for information, having to run around finding that information. So we were far more effective doing the jobs that we were there to do as lay-lows rather than sitting on phone calls.
Yes. There's a balance because
there is a balance.
One of
yes.
your tasks is to be the liaison officer.
Yeah, I appreciate that, but it was the repetition of requests.
And in some respects, rather than being a lay-low, your role was different. You're a de facto rest centre manager, isn't that correct?
Yes, it was.
In terms of structure, and you talked about bringing in structure, is it right that you brought in situation reports, and that's something that you started to submit 2 reports a day to cover morning and afternoon?
That's right.
You also established what you term as all staff meetings twice a day. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And what was the purpose? It may seem obvious, but what was the purpose of introducing all staff meetings?
There was the reason for the all-staff meeting, and when I'm talking about all staff, I'm not talking about just the council or the response side. I'm talking about volunteers as well, and partner organisations. It was to get everybody in the same room to hear the information at the same time. It was to seek feedback. And not just as an exercise, but to take away meaningful actions and start delivering against those. It was to build relationships with the people that we were working with, whether they're volunteers or from the official side. And it was to deliver the response together, because there was no way we could deliver it on our own. And if we look back on the days prior to Philip and I arriving at the Westway, it was the community that had organised themselves. It was the volunteers, the bereaved, the survivors that had actually made meaningful inroads in defining their own roles and responsibilities in delivering to their version of the response. So for me, it was so obvious that they held the information, they held the intelligence, they had contacts and connections with those that were bereaved and survived, looking for loved ones. It was the right thing to do.
I'm going to return to that matter you mentioned about the role of the volunteers in a moment. But just before doing so, if I could just deal with one matter, which is in relation to silver meetings or tactical coordination group meetings, TCGs.
Yeah.
It's right, isn't it, that you and your colleague Philip Lee Morris also ensured that you attended those meetings? Is that correct?
That's right.
In paragraph 67 of your statement, perhaps you could just quickly turn to that, please. And this was your understanding. Another challenge was that no one from the local authority or LALO prior to me and Philip had attended the silver meeting briefings held twice a day at the North Kensington Leisure Centre. Mm-hmm. And this is where communication information at Rest Centre should be provided, and equally important, where messages cascaded from this group and could be distributed to the Rest Centre. In relation to that, what made you believe that no one else had previously attended?
Because they told us.
That's what you were told?
Yeah. In the meeting.
And when I say they told you, it was the Metropolitan Police who were
Yes.
chairing those meetings?
Yes, that's right. Sorry. Yes.
And just to balance that, we do know that there's records which shows for some of the meetings on the 14th of June that representatives from OBKC were there at those meetings.
Okay.
The records in relation to the 15th and 16th of June are not very clear in relation to attendance. But your evidence today is that you were told by the chair of those TCGs that there was, on any basis, a lack of attendance by OBKC or LALOs at previous TCGs.
That's right.
And was there anything else said about the impact of that lack of attendance?
I don't recall anything said about the impact. All I recall was that it was important that a LALO attend those meetings for the reasons I've stated in this document.
And it's touched upon in your statement at paragraph 67, but did you find attending those meetings helpful? Did it assist you? Immensely. In what way?
We knew what was going on with the tower, with the there's no simple way to put this, but with those that had passed.
Yes.
We knew the structure of the building, what was happening with transport. We knew the structural integrity of the building. We knew the impact, because obviously there was a lot of firefighters still there. There was police, there was the HSE, there was the ambulance service. So we had access and information from the emergency services directly, and that would help us with information. Is the building okay? Is it going to fall down? You know, we can see body bags from Latimer Road Station, so areas need to be covered. Information about the media, you know, even things like where the hoarding was put up and there were gaps in the hoarding. We found out, I mean, one of the calls we made to Beck was to get some more hoarding in so we could fill in those gaps, so the media couldn't intrude and look to see what was going on. So we did have a lot of information, some of which we could take back to the Rest Centre and share, some of which was for LALO, and we passed on through Beck. So it's critical that you attend those meetings, really, in my view.
Well, you said it was immensely assisted you for reasons you've mentioned a moment ago.
Yeah.
On the morning of the 17th of June, you talked about a lack of information, whereas on your account, is this the case that this really increased your situational awareness?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I promised I was going to deal with volunteers at the Rest Centre as a topic, and I'm just going to turn to that now, if I may. It may assist, perhaps. You mentioned that you were a very good note taker. I believe this may be one of your notes. Let's look at LBE, please. And it's 6014. It is, yes. This is your notebook, which you've helpfully provided the inquiry to assist. And your writing is probably better than mine, so
Thank you.
we can decipher the first line. It's 809, 17th of June. Council aren't helping. Volunteers are doing everything. This is page 1, and it appears to be the first line that you've written down on your notebook in relation to what you've been doing. Council aren't helping. Volunteers are doing everything. What did you mean by this?
I think if I just set the scene, if I may, very briefly, bearing in mind that we are from another borough, bearing in mind that we were just deployed to the Westway, we have no vested interest in RBKC or the site prior to this, no view prior to this, that this was within the first hour, and all I could see was the volunteers having had coordinated, been communicating amongst themselves and the bereaved and survivors, and were delivering the things that, from donations to food to emotional support. It just seemed that they were there. They were the response.
You mentioned already that the volunteers had taken this role, and perhaps I could summarise some of the matters which you've mentioned already. Paragraph 125, you said that they already organised themselves, assigned roles, and were meeting the needs of the bereaved survivors' residents and those displaced within the community and surrounding areas. Is that a fair summary?
That is.
And paragraph 129, you say that the volunteers had already demonstrated they were organised, working on donations, deliveries, logistics, food, with residents still in the area and those in hotels.
Yeah.
And that they were a reassuring presence to the residents at the rest centre, and they were being effective. They had existing relationships with residents. They understood local, cultural and religious needs and had the language skills we needed to communicate effectively with residents. That perhaps complements what you've already told us today. Some of it is, we heard you mention eloquently a few moments ago.
Yes.
Is that a fair summary of the effectiveness of volunteers?
That's right, it is.
And your view was that it was necessary to utilise the knowledge and skills of the volunteers, is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let's look at paragraph 134, please, of your statement. Just to clarify one matter, we talked about an all-staff meeting. You also mentioned this. I called a first meeting of this kind, i.e. meetings with volunteers, at 14:39 on the 17th of June 2017. Was that the same as the all-staff meeting, or is this a separate meeting?
This was with the volunteers, because up until that point they had no real interaction with those on the response or those in charge of the rest centre. So this was the first meeting of its kind.
And is it correct from that meeting on the 17th of June in the afternoon that volunteers raised a significant number of issues which you've listed at paragraph 137 of your statement?
They did.
Perhaps we could look at that to help you.
That's it, yes.
So what I'm going to do is not going to read it all out. We can see it there, and some matters there are sensitive, but let's read some of those. The view that i.e. the response was not fast enough, there was not enough communications from the response, that hundreds of people were in hotels and families were separated, and the management of this was failing. As we touched upon already, that the police tape outside the rest centre was putting people off from attending, and that more support was needed. And then there's a matter you mentioned already in relation to matters which were visible. And then if we move down just towards the bottom, for staff to be more positive with residents. Is that correct?
That's right.
What was meant by the last matter, for staff to be more positive with residents?
The volunteers were telling me and telling Philip that they weren't being treated with the respect that people should be afforded, that staff were being rude to them, and they just weren't getting the type of support and response that they expected, the level of care that they respected, the collaboration and working together, taking on the intelligence from the volunteers, responding to that intelligence in a meaningful way with direct actions. They felt outside of the response rather than an integral part of the response.
So there's two factors there from your evidence. One, interpersonal skills, being rude.
Yes,
And secondly, not being listened to.
that's right.
Let's have a look at your situation report, or the situation report, which is LBE 6057. This is produced by the Chief Executive, and if you could go, please, to page 19 of that document, please. It's a little bit dense. And on the second page of the situation report that we're looking at, please, which will be 2023, we see Fiona Met. Can you recall who Fiona was?
Fiona Elliott was our head of hospitality and events.
At Ealing.
Yes.
Okay, so this is, I'm going to read it into record. Fiona met with lead volunteers and thanked them for their hard work. This being the 18th of June. And the love they have shown the community. She gave an overview of the changes to the centre which will take place as of tomorrow. And it will officially become a full humanitarian centre. And there's a reference to payments which I'm not going to read out.
Yeah.
The volunteers raised a number of issues. Rude and inconsiderate housing officers from ORBKC, and stated that housing officers continue to be problematic. Volunteers acting like a buffer zone between residents and the government. Some families have said that they do not want social workers.
Yeah.
Two named volunteers, Lubna and Hager, reported that some of the housing staff were heard telling victims to fuck off. And then at the end, need more services to be compassionate.
Absolutely.
So this is, from recollection, the 18th of June was a day that you were there as well.
Yes.
Yes. Were you aware, or did you observe or hear such behaviour, rude and offensive behaviour?
I personally didn't, and that's not to say it didn't happen, because I spoke to several people, both volunteers and on the Ealing side, that assured me that it did. That's not acceptable in any situation, in any circumstance. And looking back, it was with the RBKC staff being rude, the housing staff being rude to volunteers as well. I just don't understand the need for that. There was absolutely, we were all there, supposedly, trying to do the right thing and the only thing to support bereaved survivors and residents that presented to the Westway. It was absolutely uncalled for. I'm sorry I did not witness it. I wish I had, because I would have taken more direct action. But I know Lubna very well, and it is something, if she said it happened, it happened.
So we've got two sources. One, your notes from a meeting, which was information which was relayed to you. And then this is one of your colleagues who documented this and put in a situation report the next day.
Yeah.
Do you know if this issued regarding, I'm going to put it more neutrally, rude and inconsiderate behaviour, whether that was addressed and improved over the days you were there?
If I'm going to be completely blunt, it was the Ealing officers, when we attended on the 18th is when we were in Gold Command. So we had an awful lot of officers from Ealing where it did improve. With the RBKC officers, I'm not saying every single one, but there was a degree of rudeness from what I've heard and what I've seen and what I've been told. I've not heard it personally, but what I've been told, and especially when it's documented by Fiona Elliott, I have no reason to disbelieve this. It will be 100% accurate.
Okay. We'll move on in a little bit later to when the London Borough of Ealing took control, not you taking control, but the council took control on the 18th of June of the running of the rest centre. But I'm just going to, if we go back to, we don't need to look at it, but I'm going to go back in time to that first meeting you had with the volunteers. And we listed the matters which you noted, and one of those was in relation to the hundreds of people who were in hotels and families were separated, and the management of this was failing.
Yeah.
You'll recall that was something you noted down, and I want to deal with hotels for a moment if we can. So that was complained to you that there was a significant amount of people who were, there was concerns being expressed about. And what, if anything, did you do in relation to this?
It was, the volunteers had a really good grip on working with the bereaved and survivors and the hotels, in that they were organising rooms. with families that weren't together, putting them together. And what we tried to do was complement that. And I can't recall if I actually escalated that to the BEC or if it's in my sit rep, because there's a lot of detail in my situation reports. But I was 100% aware. It's in my contemporaneous notes as well about families being split up, families being put in high-rise accommodation as well, and that had to stop.
Let's look at paragraph 117 of your witness statement in relation to this topic generally. And it's really the second sentence or the second line of this paragraph. And you say that the message I wanted to convey for residents to access services at a rest centre were now being carried by volunteers directly to the residents and to those in hotels. So just dealing with that process for a moment, what messages were you wishing to convey to residents in hotels?
The first thing was that we were there as representatives of the Pan-London response, part of mutual aid, that we were from Ealing. I think it was, there was a lot of mistrust between those in North Kensington and their local authority. And it was just creating a little bit of distance from that, if I'm being fair. But also that we were listening. We understood that we had to deliver to their needs, that we were getting services in place, that we were taking down cordons, we were making it more inviting, more welcoming for people to come and seek services. There were a range of services coming in. So rather than having a shambles of desks just the other side of the turnstiles, yes, we were creating a process where residents could come in and seek the services that they want, that we were offering empathy, compassion, we were being sympathetic to their needs. So we wanted to demonstrate that our approach was different, that we were here to listen and help.
You mentioned that you don't have a specific recollection of how you escalated specific concerns, but you believe it's likely that you would have relayed it to the BEC.
Oh yeah, definitely. It would be in the sit reps or it would be via call to BEC, but we were aware of the situation. And the reason why I am confident in that is because we had a couple of families that we escalated through to BEC as well. One family that were sent to a high-rise, I think it was a 10th floor building, and another family that was still sleeping at the Westway that we had to move into temporary accommodation. So we were very much aware of the urgent need for housing in terms of hotel accommodation, emergency housing at that point.
If we could turn to another document, which is ORBK 406878, please. This is a little bit later in our timeline, the 20th of June.
Yeah.
Just going to wait for it to come up. So we see that this is on 1924. It's an email from you to the BEC.
Yes.
And copying in your colleagues. And it deals with this issue, urgent hotel issue. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to deal with feedback from volunteers. Hotels aren't feeding families 3 meals a day. They're refusing, or worse, charging. See photos for specifics. Can we ring around the hotels and fix this? Reputation damage, worse still, not halal, culturally insensitive. Also, discretionary fund release for cab transportation back to the TA, temporary accommodation, aka the hotels, centres. Probably a short email that you did on your phone. You probably were still in a rest centre then, so it's to the point.
Yeah.
Is that a fair summary?
Always to the point.
And in relation to this updated urgent hotel issue, this is 3 days after your meeting with the volunteers when this was raised.
Yeah.
And it appears that it's still an ongoing issue. Is that a fair summary?
Yes, it is.
We know from the top of this thread that it was forwarded, sent on to housing team to action. That was a response you got 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
Your time in the Westway, I think there was one more day on the 22nd of June. During that time, on the 20th to the 22nd of June, did you notice any improvement in relation to these matters?
No.
No? I want to deal with volunteers and the...
Well, I'm sorry, you say you didn't notice any improvement. How would you have noticed it?
Feedback via the volunteers. I think that was my first port of call into understanding what was going on with the residents in temporary accommodation or hotels. They were working with them on a daily basis throughout the night. So if they were telling me it wasn't improving, then it wasn't improving.
That was your source of information?
Absolutely.
Right.
And just to complete that, thank you, Mr. Chairman, this email was sent late on your penultimate day, that being the Tuesday, the 20th of June. You weren't working at the Westway on the 21st of June, and then you returned for your last day was the Thursday, the 22nd of June. And in relation to that, is that when you would have received feedback from those who were at the Westway to form that opinion?
They had my telephone number. I wasn't sure in sharing my number with the volunteers, primarily so they could call me at any time they needed. I was very serious about my role and what it is that I had to do, and I was very available to them. So it's not a case of that I would clock in and clock off. They knew how to get hold of me, so they would tell me.
Okay. So that was information which came back to you both by telephone and from what you heard and saw when you were at the Westway on the 22nd.
That's right.
Going to move on to just a small topic, which is the volunteer coordination role. So we were going a little bit back in the timeline, back to that first meeting on the 17th of June. That was part of your efforts to engage and harness the work of the volunteers at the Westway. Is it right, following that first meeting, that you set up a volunteer coordinator to assist with the organisation or indeed coordination with volunteers?
That's right. From that first meeting, it was really clear that there was a lot of things that we could learn working more closely with the volunteers in terms of need. So it was a role that we established to say, right, you know, when an officer comes in and is deployed at Westway, we want them to partner up with the volunteers, just like we had somebody looking at donations. So it was partnering up with the community volunteers, so you would add value. They would know the intelligence and the information from the bereaved and survivors, and we would bring that statutory backup that they needed, that support, that organisation, you know, the manpower. Not to say that they didn't have the manpower, because of course they did, but it was to be more collaborative, to build relationships that had frayed. Whether or not they existed prior to that, who knows, but they were certainly decayed by the time we got there. So it was doing our best to build those relationships between us, Ealing Council, and the community volunteers.
And in relation to volunteers, you used a generic umbrella term, but can you assist us with what was the composition of the volunteers? Were these from these members of the public? Were they from formal volunteer organisations? Were they from national volunteer organisations?
The volunteers that I worked with directly were mainly from the community. They were from student age upward to working individuals. I don't know if they were part of any group. I didn't ask because I didn't think to ask. Didn't have the time to ask what their background was. It was only later, as I sort of, you know, developed beyond the first 7 days in terms of my working at RBKC, did I understand more about them and their roles. But at that point, did not know.
And in relation to this role that you set up, a coordination role, was that the first time one was set up?
I believe so.
And can you recall who was that person who was given that role?
I think the first person would have been from Ealing, Lee Baldwin. If my memory serves, I can't remember exactly who.
So you can recall that somebody was appointed.
Yeah.
Just want to ask your assistance just to clarify one matter. The chief executive of London Borough of Ealing, and perhaps you could assist me with his pronunciation, is it Paul Nazarak? Nazarak,
yeah.
He has provided a statement to assist the inquiry. We don't perhaps need to look at it, but paragraph 19 he says, RBKC were responsible for providing the volunteer coordination support. Is that correct?
I've no idea of that.
No. Your recollection and evidence of on the ground was that somebody was appointed in that role from Ealing on the 17th of June.
Yeah, nobody told me or presented to me to say that I'm from RBKC Volunteers XYZ and this is what I'm doing. No.
Turn on to staff visibility, something which you've mentioned before.
Yes.
When you arrived on the 17th of June, were you aware, when you arrived and during the day, how many staff members were at the rest centre?
No, not at all.
And you mentioned that there was a lack of visibility of staff. Is it because they weren't readily identifiable?
I couldn't tell staff from community members.
We know from one of the situation reports provided by Ealing on the 17th of June, it assists you that there was approximately 40 people who were there assisting formally with response, RBKC staff, public health, housing, rest centre staff, British Red Cross, counsellors and NHS volunteers. So about 40 people noted down by Ealing in that situation rep. Does that sound about right?
If that's what Ealing have written down, then I've got to take that at its word. In terms of let me just clarify a point. When you say staff, if we could break it down into the staff that was supposed to be leading the response from RBKC to the staff that were supporting the response in terms of housing or finance, those I separate mentally because it's the leadership side that I was looking for, not the support staff who, granted, were there, not the leadership that I expected.
And the number I've given you is a global figure, which includes those who are auxiliary and supporting, not just the leadership or key staff. Mm-hmm. In relation to that lack of identification, you mentioned in one of your documents that RBKC staff in tabards, those who were wearing this sort of high-vis vests, were being singled out, and residents were very reluctant to approach them. And what did you mean by that they were being singled out?
So the RBKC staff that were there, I think they were given an instruction not to have their ID and not to be visible because of the degree of discontent and the animosity towards them because of the tower fire. We were in our high-vis and our tabards. The way in which RBKC staff, if they weren't wearing or if they were wearing their ID or their high-vis, I didn't see that, if I'm honest. I didn't see them. But there was a degree of the community would know the staff better than I would. At that point, we were fully identifiable in our high-vis and our lanyards, and if anybody stopped us or asked us where we were from, we were quite happy to tell them who we were, why we were there. But in terms of the RBKC staff, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Okay. In terms of increasing visibility of staff, you mentioned, of course, that you were visible. Was there efforts from the 17th of June to increase visibility?
There was. As part of my training, and it's something that I really did take on board, was to make sure you're visible at all times, that people know who you are. Hence, my name tag on a lanyard and my yellow high-vis jacket on at all times. And it's so people can see you in a crowd. People can focus on you and come to you if they need anything. We also, as part of the Grenfell Fire Response Team, had our high-vis jackets, tabards printed with Grenfell Fire Response Team on the back. So we were clearly visible front and back as to who we were. And anybody from Ealing that attended wore a high-vis jacket, tabard rather.
And that term, Grenfell Fire Response Team, that was a term which was to reflect the sort of pan-London response from the 16th of June. Isn't that correct?
From the 17th, I believe, is when Philip and I were there. That's when we were talking to Ealing, and it was Ealing that had the tabards printed, and that's what we referred to ourselves as. Whether or not that name existed beforehand, I don't know.
Okay. We're going to move on to another topic, but I'm in the chair's hands whether you'd like me to move on now or whether it's time.
Well, we probably ought to have the break quite soon, shouldn't
Yes.
we? And is your next topic going to be a little while?
It's probably about 5 minutes.
Well, I think it'd be best to take our break at this
Yes.
point. Is that all right?
Of course.
Right. Well, we do have a break during the morning, as you probably know, Mrs. Hardy, and we'll take it now. We'll break here. We'll resume at 20 to 12, please.
Lovely.
And while you're out of the room, I have to ask you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence
Of
or
course.
anything relating
Thank
to
you.
it. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you go with the usher then, please? Thank you. 20 to 12, please. Thank you. Would you ask Mrs. Hardy to come back in, please? Okay. All right, Mrs. Hardy, you ready to carry on?
I am.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Keating?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome back, Mrs. Hardy. We were dealing with ORBK staff. We touched upon their visibility or lack of on the 17th of June. I wonder, could we look at your statement, paragraph 60, please? And if we look at 6 bullet points from the end, paragraph 60, probably need to go over leaf. That's the correct reference. Actually, if you could go back, it's my fault. Thank you. That's it. There was some OBKC officers who did find me in the first couple of hours, but they had no official role in the response. I contacted Beck and asked for them to be removed from the site. I did not feel they were adding value, nor did I want to be hindered in my role as Lalo.
Excuse me.
That's okay. In relation to that, what did you mean by they had no official role in the response?
Well, because we weren't told who was doing what and why they were there. So when the officers, and they were senior officers within the organisation itself, I remember them walking towards me as I was outside Westway, with their notebooks and what have you, and I asked them what they were doing, what role they had to play within the response. Because I didn't get anything meaningful or anything that I could think, okay, you're adding value or you've got a role to play. It was just, well, I'm here, I'm from RBKC. But if you weren't part of the response as of the point when we took over, then you really didn't have a place in the response because you were just adding more confusion. Too many chiefs, too many bosses, too many people telling you what to do when it was our job to ascertain what was going on and start the delivery process, to identify the gaps, working with the people that we had established or we were looking to establish working with. So when you are confronted by senior officers within the organisation saying, and I do name some of them in my contemporaneous notes, when you're looking at individuals that come to you with their titles as to, we're senior officers and, this is what we want to see or what we want to do. If there's no place for it, there's no place for it. Because for me, what were they doing apart from stopping me from doing my job, from moving forward with what it is that we had planned to do or we were looking to do, to discovering the facts of the situation around Westway and the rest centre. So quite simply, I didn't think they were adding value, therefore they shouldn't be there.
So your view was, for the reasons you set out, they weren't adding value, and you contacted the Beck and asked for them to be removed.
Mm-hmm.
One alternative would have been that you tried to bring them in to this response and tried to integrate them to what you were implementing. Was that feasible?
I think that's a very fair comment. If their approach had been anything other than adversarial, I probably would.
So you recognise integration was something which was logically available, but you mentioned a moment ago if their approach had been anything other than adversarial. What do you mean by that?
When you are being approached by somebody that, and we all know what it's like to be intimidated or to have somebody approach you in a way that isn't overly friendly, then your guard goes up and my immediate priority at that point was, what can I do and how can I help? So having somebody approach me in that manner wasn't integrating enough for me. Whether that's a right decision or a wrong decision, it was a decision I made at the scene.
And was there anything else which led to you forming the view that the ORBKC staff you had contact with were being adversarial?
Just their approach on that Saturday.
I wonder if you could turn to paragraph 115, please, of your statement. And it probably flows from what you have said, that in terms of interaction,
Yeah.
aside from perhaps a few ORBKC staff, I did not interact with them, nor did I see them in significant numbers, and I did not direct them during my deployment. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And is it the position that because of your view that you formed as to the utility of ORBKC staff, you did not interact with them?
I didn't interact with them because I didn't know who they were. They weren't readily identifiable, as I've said earlier this morning. Had they been readily identifiable, had they come to us with meaningful exchanges or information on what they were doing and how they were working to support the bereaved survivors and residents, of course I would have brought them in. But I didn't experience that. And if I didn't experience that and I didn't see them and I didn't interact with them, how can I make use of them?
Okay. I'm going to move on now to the British Red Cross. We've already discussed your understanding of their role in relation to registration.
Yeah.
And the issues in relation to that, as you described. What was your experience of their wider contribution to the operation of the Westway during the days when you were present?
Wasn't aware of very much in terms of the Red Cross. I did speak to a couple of individuals from the Red Cross, but from the desk that was located outside of the Westway, and they were all in their Red Cross uniforms with their insignia clearly on display. All I saw of them was at the front desk. And because they were there was a few of them. I did have to ask them to go into the community towards Maxilla itself and to... If somebody's in uniform and they're easily recognisable as, whether they're emergency services or, Red Cross with their Red Cross badges on, then it's easier for individuals within the community to say, right, okay, I recognise that uniform, maybe I should go and ask that person for support, or for that person in uniform, if they are to support the response, to say, is there anything I can do? How can I help? Did you know the Westway is operating and these are the services? So the reason I asked the Red Cross to disperse is that they were there in numbers and they could go out towards the community and help shepherd people back to the Westway if they wanted the support services that we were starting to deliver from within the Westway, or if they wanted food, or if they needed donations, or if they wanted to come in and just get some rest.
And in relation to that, is that something that the British Red Cross did when you encouraged them to do so?
They did, yes.
And is this something which was implemented on the 17th of June, or was it later in the timeline?
It was that first weekend. It probably was I can't tell you the exact time, but it was over that first weekend. And it was to make use of the resources that we had. And obviously the Red Cross are a huge resource. So I thought at that time, maybe they can help get people and direct them back towards the Westway.
One other matter which I can summarise, it's from paragraph 119 of your statement, 5 lines down, is that one of the key changes we implemented working with the volunteers was to give direction to the Red Cross team to allow all residents, bereaved and families to access the rest centre. And this was a significant bone of contention where they were being stopped from entering.
Yeah.
Who, as you understood it, was being stopped from entering the rest centre?
The community. The community. So the Red Cross were taking the names and then issuing the different colour wristbands. So the wristbands they change colour every day, and they were different for staff, for volunteers, and the community. So we all had different wristbands according to our designation, let's say. But not everybody could get in to the rest, and I didn't understand why, because the rest centre is there for anybody. That it should be there for anybody and everybody within that area to come in and seek support, whatever that support looks like and feels like to them. That is the access point. So we did say, can you just let people in? Don't bar them. Let's not bar anybody from accessing us, whether it's Philip and I, or the services, or the food, the donations, whatever it is that you need. Even if you need to use a restroom, let people in.
And in relation to that greater access, when was that implemented, can you recall?
For the first weekend, and I think that kind of went hand in hand with taking down the police tape, making it more accessible. So, as I said earlier, it didn't look like a crime scene. Working with the Red Cross to say, look, you know, they're not coming to a party; they're coming for support. So let's let people in. Let's be that change for the community.
I'm going to move on now to the time where you had contact with the London Local Authority Gold.
Yeah.
And that was on the 17th of June at around 7:30. And is it right that you and Philip Lee Morris were asked to join a meeting with John Barradell and Eleanor Kelly and Alex Woodman?
That's right.
Was this the first time you met with anybody this senior from ORBKC or any other London council at that stage?
Yes, it was.
And this meeting obviously was in person?
It was.
Down at the Westway?
That's right.
And perhaps we could open up paragraph 46 of your statement dealing with this meeting on the evening of the 17th of June. And at paragraph 46, we can see the background at paragraph 45. And at paragraph 46, it says this: they, John Barradell, Eleanor Kelly and Alex Woodman, asked for an open and honest assessment, conversation and update. I told them both that things were chaotic and there was a high degree of mistrust with anyone on the response and a lack of delivery to address the outcomes needed, as well as service desks to support and meet those outcomes. Is that correct?
It is.
What was John Barradell and Eleanor Kelly's response to this open and honest assessment?
They asked the question. They asked for our first-hand view and thoughts of that initial day on the response. So it was by invitation that they sought a response from us. And in light of everything that Philip and I had experienced that day and everything we were feeding back to the BEC, everything we documented, whether it's in a sit rep or contemporaneous notes, all the information and feedback that we've had from volunteers, our interaction with bereaved and survivors, it was critical that we gave John Barradell and Eleanor Kelly an honest view on what we had experienced that day and what was going on, and the feedback directly from the community, what we saw, what we felt, what we heard.
Yes. And we could see from your statement, and perhaps I could summarise, is that you were asked by Mr. Barradell what was needed, and you responded, for me to remain in control. You were thanked, and then at paragraph 48, we see that Mr. Barradell confirmed that the rest centre was to be put under Ealing Council's command, who would take over the goal command for this site. But in effect, Ealing Council would be responsible for the operation and management of the rest centre at the Westway.
That's right.
You also mentioned at paragraph 50, which I can perhaps summarise, is that you provided Mr. Barradell and Eleanor Kelly with a list of resources and items required to help you and Mr. Lee Morris in your role. Is that correct?
It is.
And perhaps we could turn to LBE 56055. This is something you've provided. It's your exhibit, but the maker of the document is Eleanor Kelly, the lady who we've mentioned, the Chief Executive of London Borough of Southwark.
That's right.
And these are notes setting out things that are needed. And starting at the top with structure, talks about roles and responsibility, command and control, identification badges with roles. In brackets, right people doing the right thing in the right way. And the third line, it states some continuity of personnel and management.
Mm-hmm.
Those matters, were they addressed in the time that you experienced after that meeting, so on the 18th, 19th, 20th and 22nd?
They were.
You consider that there was an improvement in relation to those?
There was, because we weren't reporting to or via a borough that we had no connection with and no understanding of how they operated in terms of their staffing and who was who. So by bringing it under Ealing, obviously Philip and I are both from Ealing Council, we knew who was who from the chief executive down, who the personnel were. The roles and responsibilities, if I just take them, is something that we worked with the community, and we designated, for instance, a donations lead, a volunteer lead, somebody to manage money, that kind of thing.
Yes.
Command and control, that was the structure. Having everybody easily identifiable with their Grenfell Fire Response tabards on. The right people, and again, what I meant by the right people doing the right thing in the right way is that a council organisation is a vast entity. It's a vast organisation with lots of different specialisms, lots of different divisions, and people doing different things. So when I'm talking about the right people, is send me in or let me work with somebody that can set up the service desks the way that I envisioned. And doing the right thing the right way is to keep the community at the core of all of the decisions that we made, because it was about them, it wasn't about us.
I'm just going to draw out a few more matters which are noted in Eleanor Kelly's note, and that derives from the meeting you had with her. Proper physical arrangements. There's a lot of things listed there, but includes help desks, a quiet room, faith spaces, and private meetings. And then if we turn over to page 2 in relation to other matters, well, we can see at the bottom of page 1, need accurate information in relation to numbers using and visiting the centre, need a log of people staying overnight, a matter which we've heard about already. And at page 2, we see the issue regarding hotels being raised. Again, a single point of contact for each hotel, proper information as who is there, proper communication, what they should do to access delivery of goods, foods to be delivered, and a follow-up calls mechanism. After raising these matters, and these were noted by Eleanor Kelly, did you notice from your experience in the next following days whether there was an improvement in relation to both the rest centre and its presentation?
I definitely noticed a difference in terms of the rest centre. And I think the reason for that is that when Ealing took Gold Command, and it was from that night, and obviously it was more active and more visible from the morning of the 18th of June. And we had a corporate board presence, which was greatly received, especially by Philip and I. So we had the support, and we also felt empowered to do what it is that was necessary to take all of these decisions forward and make a difference. In terms of the staff that were involved, again, going back to my earlier point, we had the right people from the right teams, even all the way down to a logist from the Safer Communities team that's used to taking notes at a very fast pace, accurately. All of these little things helped. Corporate board being there, from the chief executive to the former leader of Ealing Council to the members of the executive directors group, including our borough commander, who was Keith Townsend at the time, was immense for us at that time.
So you've mentioned from the 18th when London Borough of Ealing took over control formally, is that there was that senior leadership present. In terms of your dealings with Mr. Bardell and Eleanor Kelly, is it right that that was the only direct communication you had with them the night before on the 17th? It
was for that weekend, yes.
And in terms of this, the support that they provided you, those in London Gold, John Bardell and Eleanor Kelly, how would you describe it?
I was told later on that John Bardell and Eleanor coming to the site was unprecedented, and I know that's an overused word, but in this instance, when I really didn't have an idea who they were when I was asked to go into a meeting until Philip informed me of the significance and the role that they played within the response. Obviously, I knew that Gold were overseeing everything. But when they came down, we felt heard, we felt seen, and we felt valued, and therefore we felt empowered to carry on. It's not as if I sought permission from anybody with all the decisions that I was making, rightly or wrongly, through the response on that first day. But when they turned up that evening, you feel that your actions are validated, and from the emails that I've seen from within Ealing, to state that prior to our arrival it was chaos and the only competent people were from Ealing. So when they came down and actually told us that face to face, we knew that we were doing something right, and we just had to carry on doing it.
I'm going to move on to do a discrete item, which is central government support. During your time at the West Centre, were you provided with any support from central government? And that would include the Department of Communities and Local Government, DCLG, as it was known as then.
Yes, I do remember meeting some individuals from the DCLG. They came down to set up some desks, but I didn't have an active or an in-depth relationship, or couldn't really afford anybody much time at that point, because we were so busy trying to get the centre up and running. But we needed desks for, from postal services to driving licences to passports to visas, so that kind of thing. We needed their support on, but we just let them in and this is your job. You set up the desk.
And in relation to that involvement, central government departments who came down and attended and set up help desks, did you consider that involvement assisted with the provision of support to those who were affected?
Yeah, I did. All of those services that were there were needed.
I'm going to examine more the support which was then thereafter provided at the rest centre. You mentioned at paragraph 34 of your statement, we don't need to look at it, that when you arrived at the rest centre back on the 17th of June, there was no signs telling residents what the rest centre offered, services or help, who to speak to, and so on. And what did you and Philip Lee Morris do to remedy this issue regarding the lack of signage?
We got flip chart paper and wrote up that it was the rest centre. We wrote out the services, that there was donations. So we actually created those signs and stuck them to the walls and the windows within the main area of the rest centre. And we used flip charts to keep ourselves updated on what was going on. So it was literally marker pens and paper.
Yes. So you did the best you could
with the resources that we had. We had to improvise, so we did.
And is it fair to say, after those initial efforts over the weekend of the 17th and 18th of June, that there was still remaining issues regarding the presentation of signs at the Westway?
There were, but we were aware that they were going to be printed and placed around Westway and the site of Westway as well. The Grenfell Assistance Centre, to direct people and to detail the services that were on offer. But for that first weekend, it was pen and paper.
We perhaps don't need to turn to it, but we've got a situation report in Ealing one again, 1912 on the 19th of June, so the Monday evening, where within that Keith Townsend, the name you mentioned, refers to further work required to improve on-site signage and general communication about the centre.
Yeah.
So there was an awareness that this was an issue.
Oh, yes,
and there was efforts ongoing to address that.
Yeah.
Perhaps we could look at paragraph 98 of your statement, please. And it's something we've mentioned a couple of times in passing, help desks. And you say this: when I arrived, this being the 17th of June, as I've stated, the help desks were a jumble of desks and just beyond the turnstiles. They were manned by staff, but it was difficult to know what was going on and what the support being offered was. I did not know who was managing this, but it was clear that a better, more effective process was necessary, and you worked on creating such a process. Is that fair?
That's correct.
And perhaps to assist everybody, that we could see some images in relation to that. We're going to see a plan, and then we're going to see some photographs. There shouldn't be anything in that, Mr. Chairman, which is distressing, but perhaps I should, out of an abundance of caution, give a trigger warning that we're going to look at the West Way.
Thank you.
So if there's anybody who may find this distressing, just to give them the opportunity to leave the room or not watch on the live feed. So we're talking about the floor plan, and we're going to move now on to LBE 6040, please. So this is the Grenfell Assistance Centre Standing Operating Procedure. Pausing there for a moment, we know from your statement this is a document which was created by you and your colleagues during your time at the Westway to try to bring some order and some process. Is that correct?
That's right. It was under the jurisdiction of our Head of Emergency Management, Donna Wootton, and Philip and I contributed towards this document.
So in terms of the document...
So can we be clear, when were the photographs taken? Do you remember?
Oh gosh, that was the first weekend.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I think we might hopefully cover those dates in a moment.
Yes, very well. Thank you.
And bring some clarity. If we could turn to page 27, please. Thank you. So we see there, so this is service stalls. Let's give everyone an opportunity just to acclimatise. So the floor plan, Grenfell Assistance Centre, the service stalls are on the right-hand side in a sort of U shape. Is that correct?
That's right.
It perhaps speaks for itself. There's a comfy seating area, children's play area, a divider in the centre. And then we can see that there's other charities such as the CAB and a help desk on the opposite side, on the left-hand side of the divider. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes.
And in relation to this plan, can you assist approximately when this was introduced?
Going back to the situation of the array, or the one or two desks beyond the turnstiles, and there was lots of people milling about. There was also people eating food there, so it wasn't conducive to even holding a degree of conversations in private or to understand needs. But because there was a need and there were a number of services that had to come in and support the bereaved and survivors, that small area wasn't going to be sufficient. So the idea was to have this horseshoe. I do business process for a living. So my idea was to have a process where people could come in from one side and work their way around the services that were offered to receive the support, the advice, the help that they required. This was put together, it's going back to the point of having the right people at the right time to do the right thing. This was put together by our hospitality and events team, this plan, but it was absolutely what we had envisaged that first day. So that would have started happening probably on the Monday, from the Sunday, probably from the Monday, and I wasn't obviously on site on the Monday.
Just pausing there for a moment. It's a long answer.
Sorry.
Probably on the Monday, and I'm keen that we capture all your evidence. But if you focus as best you can on the question, which was when do you think it was introduced, which was the Monday, and I anticipate we'll capture those other matters in a moment. If we could go to page 33, please. And the bottom image of page 33 we can look at. And it says there, view of all services before the screen dividers were installed. So again, just to give everyone the opportunity of what the Westway, we've heard a lot about it, what it looked like. So this would have been, on your account, would have been at the weekend of the 17th and 18th, if your belief was the horseshoe was introduced by the Monday the 19th.
Yeah, it was in that week after that first weekend.
We see some signage there, Does that help you in terms of dating the document?
Of dating the document. The document was created, we contributed towards it on the Monday the 19th.
Okay.
When this was created, I can't give you an exact date of when this look and feel was implemented.
It's probably an imprecise question for me. I'm just trying to see if we could date the photograph. But we see that there is high-vis tabards visible there, and we can see some signage.
Mm-hmm.
Were those signs that you had put up, or were they already there?
It's signs that were created, so it's to designate what each area was delivering, whether it was housing or social care or,
I understand that, but were they signs that you had caught?
I had not created them.
You hadn't done them?
I hadn't created them.
So they were pre-existing?
They were after that first weekend, so
Okay.
they were created.
Thank you. If we scroll up to see the other image at the top, page 33, so in some respects we've seen a before and after. This is the after, and this is the barrier, the screen, which has divided the room, which was implemented as one of your ideas in this new process. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, that is right.
All right. If you yourself took photographs, which you've provided to the inquiry,
I did.
and perhaps we could look at those as well, please. And that's LBE, and we've got 6 zeros again, 51. And perhaps we could, if possible, just blow that up a little bit more. And as it says there, these are photographs taken during your deployment as Layla at the rest centre.
Mm-hmm.
And you've helpfully dated them. This is the 22nd of June. So this is your last day.
Yes.
Can you recall when those soft furnishings when they were provided?
Oh, gosh, no, I don't know the precise day
No.
of delivery.
Well, were they there when you first arrived?
No.
And it's probably likely that there weren't something that was raised in your meeting with Mr. Bardell. Likely it was...
Yeah, soft furnishing, so people coming to the Westway, whilst they're receiving services or waiting, that they would be comfortable. The priority was to make it welcoming, and having soft furnishings, you can see rugs as well, sofas, was really important.
And one can understand why. Let's move on, please, to the next page, page 2, and we'll see some more in terms of furnishings. The first image is the sports hall service desk and children's play area, again on the 22nd of June.
Mm-hmm. May I mention that the children's area or a creche area where children could play while their parents or carers were seeking support came directly from community volunteers to request that. So we implemented it on their request.
And that was part of your listening
Yes.
brief that you mentioned to us.
Yes.
And if we see at the bottom of that picture, page 2, forgive me, we see signage as of the 22nd of June, financial support for, and then it lists some addresses which we're familiar with.
Yes.
Is that correct?
That's right.
And overleaf page 3, I think, in fact, I can recognise 2 of the people there. That's you on the right, and Mr. Morris, is that correct? Lee Morris on the left.
That's right.
And that's the food and donations table, which we could see on the 18th of June from your date at the back. Is that correct?
That's right.
And then if we turn over to page 4, please, and we see signage outside the rest centre, and this is the 1st of July.
Yes.
And that's one of the signs.
Yes.
And we can see at the bottom of this figure 7 assistance centre a bigger sign than the first one.
Yes.
And that's directing people where to go, again dated the 1st of July.
That's right.
So you mentioned already we can turn that, we don't need to have those images anymore. Thank you very much. In relation to the support, your intention, you talk about process, was to try to improve matters.
Yes.
And especially having the U shape for different desks, support desks. Were you aware of any criticism that one of the effects of that process of having a number of different help desks was that an individual who needed support would have to repeat their account more than once?
Yes, I was aware. I was aware a lot later rather than at the time.
Yes. So in terms of a lesson learned, is there a lesson learned there perhaps about the process?
There's a tell us once process. For me, it's a really big lesson for me as well. And I think for anybody responding, it's harrowing having to, and I can only imagine because, whilst I was there, I was in support, but having to give your details from one desk to the next desk to the next desk, I can only apologise for that. I do think that a better system needs to be implemented, a tell us once, where the information is collected at a single point, then filtered through the emergency response, so that everybody that's delivering within those services has those details up. So the only thing that you should give is your name, and then your details should flash up on a screen. And I wasn't aware of that at the time.
Well, you've mentioned you had 1 hour of LALO training and your intention of attending. But thank you very much for that contribution in relation to things to change or to bear in mind. I want to deal with a couple of other areas briefly, if I may, because they're helpfully set out comprehensively in your statement, which is provision of food and drink. And is this a fair summary that there was, when you arrived, no food management or identification of food needs apart from those which were recognised by volunteers?
That's right.
And after you assumed control of the rest centre, one of your processes which was implemented was to try to introduce outside seating.
Yes.
One, it was very hot, but two, to make it better for those who were breaking their fast during Ramadan, to break their fast together outside the rest centre.
That's right.
And in relation to those who were observing Ramadan, was there any efforts to try to ensure that there was food available for those at that time once they were breaking their fast?
There was a lot of food from local restaurants. There was food from the local Gurdwara and the Gurdwara in Southall, I believe. There was a lot of community-based food donations, a lot of community-based food organisations that had come in to feed the bereaved and survivors and feed those that were working there. I must admit, their generosity was abundant. There were drinks and there were sandwiches. There was the Westway Cafe as well that were giving out teas and coffees, but there wasn't any process in place aside from what the community volunteers brought to it and what we wanted to piggyback off and support and develop. I think for me, one of the biggest things is being aware of the fact that it was in the holy month of Ramadan, understanding that there were different dietary needs, understanding the importance of the iftar meal, understanding the importance of breaking fast together, and understanding that we were coming up towards Eid and how important that is culturally within the area of North Kensington. Something that I wasn't aware of when I went into the role of LALO, but something that I quickly learned because of the support from certain volunteers, Lubna being one, Nadia being another. So many of them informed me. With that information, I could use that to support the bereaved and the survivors, and hopefully do the right thing.
Yes.
In terms of culture and cultural sensitivity.
I'm going to move on, please, to financial support. And you say this in your statement at paragraph 36. Perhaps I could summarise it for you. When you were first attended the Westway, the outgoing LALO handed you a brown envelope containing cash with names handwritten on the back, indicating where they'd been given money to those that came to the rest centre. That was the position. What did you understand the process, if any, in relation to the distribution of financial assistance?
Had no idea. Completely honestly, I had absolutely no idea that it was happening in terms of the cash handouts and the way in which they were being managed or not managed. And
in relation to introducing any guidance or strategy, was one implemented for discretionary payments?
In terms of what, the 500 or the 5,000 or the...
Well, you mentioned that you're just given an
Yeah,
envelope
okay,
of cash.
yeah.
How
Yeah.
did you change that, or did you?
I didn't. There was so much going on. What I did was I gave it back and said, whoever's running or delivering the financial management side or the donation, just carry on. I didn't take that on board, and I didn't change it because I was busy doing other things. If they had their own process where they were giving out money, because it was it was still under RBKC at that point. It wasn't under Ealing. So on that first day, it was still RBKC. So if they were doing what they had to do in terms of ensuring the discretionary payments were getting to the residents and carry on, because I'm busy doing all of the reconnaissance stuff and the other bits that I had to do. So that I didn't do immediately, no.
So in terms of your direct knowledge of the financial aspects, because of your focus on other matters, understandably, that wasn't an area which you had significant knowledge of.
No, but to be handed an envelope full of cash with names written on the back, I told them to, until they were passing it out to those that presented and requested it, to keep it in a locked locker or something where it was safe.
Yes. Perhaps we could have your assistance in relation to one matter.
Yes.
Under this umbrella of financial assistance before we move on. It's RBK 404144, please. This is an email dated the 18th of June from Alex Russell, Director of Communication and Community Engagement at the Westway Trust, who was one of the officials at the Westway Sports Centre. So it's Alex Russell, we see there, the Westway, 18th of June at 1640. Copied into other people. You are not a recipient in this email, but I just want to know whether you are aware of this issue. We have a number of people contacting us for money today, and I support it with the funds we have here. Many people are either unaware of the opportunities for them at the sports centre, or they do and they can't travel or are scared to go there because it feels too official. Mm-hmm. I've suggested to the Ealing team at Westway Sports Centre to make a team of people available who are working in the field, going to people's accommodation and distributing funds. I've been told Keith, that's Keith Townsend, is not prepared to do this because they do not have the resources. I have had a request for me to go to the Premier Inn in Hammersmith to distribute money to survivors and those impacted. I can do this, but I have a limited amount of money to give out today. Were you aware of this need for emergency funds to be distributed to those in hotels on the 18th of June?
No, I wasn't.
And we know in relation to Premier Inn in Hammersmith that on the 19th of June, 6 days after the fire, we've heard already that the London Borough of Hammersmith and Fulham undertook an independent check and found 12 families there who had no money and had not been visited by RBKC. Yeah. But from your evidence today, is that something you weren't aware of?
I wasn't aware of this.
Thank you. Well, let's move on to donations, please. And again, it's an important matter, but one we can deal with perhaps succinctly. Is this fair? Is that there was a significant amount of donations which were at the Westway, both perishable and other matters which were non-perishable?
That's right.
And in relation to those, it was the volunteers, as you say at paragraph 108, were those who had coordinated themselves into sorting this and distributing items and requesting items that were needed. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
And at that stage, were you aware whether RBKC or the Red Cross or any other local authority staff, were they assisting with the organisation of donations?
At the time, I didn't identify who, again, I'm going to say this again, who was staff and who was a volunteer. I've later found out there were staff because I recognised their faces, having seconded over to RBKC and, yes, working at the Curve. But at that point, no, my assumption was, from what I saw, there were a lot of volunteers sorting out, especially in the basketball courts. There were masses of donations that needed to be sorted out, clothes, etc.
So for somebody who was there on the ground and had direct experience of the donations, how would you describe the impact, whether positive or negative, of so many physical donations at the Westway?
It was overwhelming. There was so much. There was so much there. There was so much coming in. We had calls from Beck saying not to accept any more donations, which we rejected. Philip and I rejected, based on the fact that it wouldn't come across well. It wouldn't be the right thing to do. People have travelled or are sending things from, not only London, but all around the country. We had one delivery, I think it was either Yorkshire or Wales, I can't remember, that came in a truck, and I'm not going to turn them away. So we took all donations in. It was overwhelming, but that could be sorted out later. It was the goodwill behind the donations that was important.
And in terms of resources, looking at this from a managerial or personnel perspective, how much resources was used, whether it's volunteers or BKC or London Borough of Ealing staff, were used to manage the physical donations?
When Ealing took gold, obviously we had a donations lead that worked with the volunteers. It was more volunteers from what I saw, working within the basketball courts to try and sort out what was what and to pass on any donations to individuals in need of them. I can't tell you how many people were involved. It was so much and so many.
More than a handful of people?
Gosh, yes.
I'm going to move on to the final section, and it's to deal with lessons learned. And it's something which you have reflected upon yourself, and you've assisted by that in your statement. And you prepared a personal briefing document, which you produce as an exhibit outlining those lessons learned. And perhaps we could have a look at that. It's LBE, and it's 6 zeros again, 56. We can look at the first page. It's an aide memoir that you prepared, correct?
Yep.
Is this something you prepared after the event?
It was, yes.
Yes. And your source of information for preparing this post-incident aide memoir, did that include the notes you made contemporaneously?
Absolutely, yes.
And was that supplemented by recollections and reflections as well?
Yeah, it was learning on the job.
Yes. So there's a lot there, and what I'm going to do with your assistance is if we could turn to page 3, please. Initial lessons learned, and there's about 20 bullet points, and I'm not going to take you through them all. We've considered them and will consider them, of course, with care. I will draw out some of those in the next few minutes, but lots of points there. But perhaps one way of dealing with this is this: if you were to highlight the most important lesson that you learned or could be learned from your experiences, what would it be?
I would get involved and seek the assistance and the support and work more collaboratively with the community and the community volunteers. I would also seek out and work more collaboratively with the organisations that were already on the ground, Harrow, Rugby, Portobello, etc., the organisations that have a presence for a very long time within the area. I didn't know of their existence whilst I was at the Westway, and we just got snippets of information. But it's not to approach this response as a statutory entity, council or government, but to understand and realise that there are lots of bridges that need to be crossed and lots of gaps that need to be closed. And the only way you can do that is by working with those that live in the area, work in the area, and are affected by what's gone on in the area.
So I'm going to just draw out a few matters. It says initial lessons learned, although some of it perhaps is more a comment on the adequacies of the response. The first one we can see is, while the response for Cross Council had been triggered, there was an abject lack of operational control and assigned roles and responsibilities. And you've mentioned that to us this morning.
Yes.
And your second bullet point is the immediate and initial command presence on site is useful to calm residents and other parties involved.
Yes.
And you mentioned in your evidence to us already having the Ealing corporate directive, those senior members of,
Yes.
from Ealing Council, both paid and representative councillors, for those being on the ground on the
Yes.
18th of June, that made a material difference.
100%.
And was that a material difference to staff who were there, or was it to the public, or both?
I think it's really important not to undervalue the significance of having your bosses there when you're delivering to a role, and especially in delivering to something as traumatic and as harrowing, because the things that we saw and the things that we heard, to have that presence of our corporate board and the leader of the council there shows that they support us and that they have faith in what we were doing. To have that presence seen by the community and the residents, that there is a hierarchy within Ealing Council that is on the ground. We treated Kensington, North Kensington, as if the disaster happened within Ealing. That's how seriously we all individually and collectively took our roles.
In relation to other matters you raised, we can see about bullet point 4, notice boards on site to inform. It says can be flip charts to start with. And it says this: information leaflets need to be distributed within hours to manage expectations. These need to be issued to all community centres acting as release centres, as well as communicated by social media, news, websites.
Yeah.
So in relation to communication, this refers to.
Yeah.
And leaflets, these are for public. Is that correct?
Yes, I do believe, and those that work with me know that I always say communication is king. It absolutely is. In this situation, for me, it was communicating what's on offer, what can we do, why are we there, why is Ealing taken over, what services, what support is available to the community, the bereaved survivors and residents. Why are we there? What are we doing to help? We need to communicate that pretty quickly. And I think one of the lessons is to have that social media hit the button and it goes out. Have it prepared.
Well, let's follow through on this theme, to use your phrase, communication is king. We have 3 bullet points from the bottom. It says this: clear and regular communication by Gold Comms is necessary to inform the public on the humanitarian relief effort being delivered. Mm-hmm. And by reference to Gold Comms here, is that London Local Authority Gold Comms you're referring to?
Yes, or the local authority in charge.
Yes.
All local authorities have their own comms teams, so it's working in collaboration, depending on the size and the scale of the response, whether it's local borough or pan-London, there should be a process in place.
And just picking up on the phrase Gold Comms, in this context, and looking back when you were involved, when the London Local Authority resolution had been activated, were there issues with regards to clear and regular communication by Gold Comms to the public during the response that you experienced from the 17th of June?
I think that's reflected in the feedback from the volunteers in the community as to why we were there, or who was, what had, obviously everybody knew what had happened, but what had happened to decide that Ealing was now as gold lead within the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, but also where to go, what services, whether they're central or peripheral to the response, are on offer. So that clear strategic thread from gold right down to the ground needs to be delivered, needs to be operated and delivered. So that was what I'm trying to say here, is that through gold, whether that's distributed to a local authority through their comms team, but that channel of comms, yes, I know it was happening within Ealing's executive director group. We're talking to Gold Comms, but we did get some of that information, not all of that information. Yes. So if we're getting sketchy information, what information is the community or those directly affected getting? So it was just, you need to package it and deliver it in a way that it makes sense.
And in relation to this, your chief executive, whose statement we've read out already, says at paragraph 35 of his statements, communications to community and families of public messages was a challenge throughout. This led to individuals and families attending the centre before processes were fully in place. Maintaining a reporting line with the HASC, the Humanitarian Assistance Steering Group, assisted with meeting this challenge. Do you agree with that assessment, that it was a challenge throughout, and sometimes families and individuals attended the centre before processes were fully in place?
Well, they should be attending the centre regardless of whether or not a process is fully in place, and then we just have to deliver to the best of our ability. You can't set up a process, which we saw at the first weekend, and say, right, okay, everything's ready, you can come in now. It doesn't work like that in a disaster.
No.
You have to have, you know, and a lot of the decisions and the way in which we operated, yes, they weren't textbook pan-London response, but we used common sense, we used our initiative, and we used our experience as local authority officers in our designated roles to do the best that we could. So yes, in an ideal world, which it wasn't, you would have these systems and processes set up. You would probably have the systems and processes set up from the night of the fire, not on day 4. So yes, we were on a back foot. It would have been great for us to walk in and have everything set up, but we had to do that whilst dealing with everything else that was happening as well. So, you know, whether or not I agree with it, it's not what happened.
Well, Mrs. Hardy, I'm very grateful for your time today. They're the questions I have for you. And what I'm going to do is, Mr. Chairman, is ask for a short period of time to see if there's any questions from those who are watching or those who are in the room.
Yes. How long do you think would be appropriate?
I think 5 minutes should be sufficient.
Well, if we say 1:45,
Yes.
I'll give you slightly more.
Thank you.
All right. Mrs. Hardy, when Council gets to the end of his questions, we have to have a short break to enable him to take stock and also to enable others who are following the proceedings from elsewhere to suggest questions that perhaps ought to be put to you. So we'll break now until 1:45, and then when you come back, we'll see if there are any more questions for you.
Of course.
All right. So
Thank you.
would you go to the usher, please?
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we'll come back at 1:45 unless you let us know you need more time.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Would you ask Mrs. Hardy to come back in, please? Right, Mrs. Hardy, well, we'll see if there are any more questions for you. Yes, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's just one matter, really, which is this. Is there anything else that you wanted to add to your evidence which may assist the inquiry with its investigations?
Not at this moment.
No.
No, can't think of anything.
Okay. Well, thank you so
But
much.
May I read my personal statement? Is that an option?
What is this personal statement?
It's just a statement that I wrote prior, as part of my witness statement.
Have we seen it already?
You've seen it.
Oh, well, you may have the advantage of us.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the exact documents you're referring to.
So it's the first page of my witness statement.
Yes, well, if you feel that there's a matter which you wanted to assist the panel with, perhaps you could refer to that then.
Shall we get the statement up so we can follow it? Would that be a good thing?
Thank
Yes.
you.
Right.
Yeah, it's the
Of course, I now understand.
Right, well,
We have those in front of us. Paragraph 2 and paragraph 3 are the matters you're
Yes.
referring to.
Yes.
Do you want to read it out?
I
or do
just
you want us
wanted-
to read it?
I don't mind reading it out.
Well, you read it out if you want to.
Okay.
That's all right.
So I wrote this and I just wanted to say that I would like to offer my deepest condolences to the bereaved and survivors who lost loved ones in the devastating Grenfell Tower fire on the 14th of June 2017. Many of whom I met, and Philip and I both met during our deployment at the rest centre during the 17th to the 22nd of June. And my subsequent shifts from the 10th to the 20th of July 2017, and then throughout my secondment with RBKC from that September to March 2018. It was my honour and privilege to have worked at the rest centre during the first weekend after the Grenfell Tower fire to the 22nd of June 2017. And I have the utmost respect and admiration for you all, including the North Kensington residents and volunteers, all of whom rallied around each other, providing the help and support from the night of the fire, which was otherwise missing. Under intense national and international media scrutiny, dealing with bereavement, loss of property and possession, you have conducted yourselves with dignity, strength, love and resilience, and have continued to do so. It goes on to the following page.
Well, if you could turn over then, please. Thank you.
I was fortunate to have been deployed at the rest centre to use my skills and experience working closely with volunteers in order to create a centre to cocoon those affected and meet their most urgent needs. From this experience, I will take away lifelong friendships and a deep love and respect for the bereaved, survivors and residents of Grenfell Tower and North Kensington. I may have left my official duties, both the Grenfell Fire Response Team, later as advisor to the Curve Community Centre, and finally as an Ealing Council officer, but I will always continue to support you. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Westway staff for allowing us to use their site and supporting us while we operated the rest centre. Finally, to Ealing Council, and obviously to Philip as well. To Ealing Council's Executive Board, former leader of the Council and colleagues during the period of the 17th of June to the 22nd of June. We all came together to respond to a disaster as one team, helping our neighbouring borough in a time of great need, and together we made a difference, treating North Kensington residents as though they were our own. Thank you all for stepping up. I think it's fair to say that we made Ealing proud. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, thank you.
Well, Mr. Hardy, thank you so much. Firstly, thank you for your evidence today and coming. And also thank you for assisting the inquiry with your written and oral evidence.
Thank you.
And it's right, I should thank you on behalf of the panel as well. We've heard a lot about the Westway Centre, and I think you're the first person who's come to talk to us about the circumstances there and how it operated, and even to describe and show us through your photographs what it looked like inside. So we're very grateful. It's been very helpful to us. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And now
Thank
you're
you,
free
panel.
to go.
Thank you so much.
Right, would you like to go with the usher then, please? She'll look after you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Keating. Now, we have another witness, but
I think 2 o'clock is
2 o'clock.
probably, if that's acceptable to...
so long as that doesn't put you in any difficulty,
Nope, not
that
at
seems very sensible.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll break there then and resume at 2 o'clock, please. Thank you.